Good afternoon. Can you describe some of the key findings of the new report? Why has Guinea-Bissau become a narco-state?
Right, thanks. Well, I think with the new report, we were trying to tell two stories. And one was about an accelerating array of crises that were unfolding in Guinea-Bissau, most recently a military coup d'etat that occurred in April 2012. This was obviously having spillover effects for West Africa, so we were very concerned about that. I think the second story we were trying to tell, though, has wider implications for the entire continent. And it's has to do with the fact that Guinea-Bissau has for several years now been referred to as Africa's first narco-state. And if it was the first, what does this mean? Does this mean there's going to be a second narco-state, a third narco-state? So looking at Guinea-Bissau would allow us to examine, what was the progression of events that led to it becoming a narco-state, and what are the prospects for other African narco-states? And this is especially concerning because there has been a number of instances of high-value narcotics seizures on the continent. Most people are very familiar with the amount of cocaine flowing from Latin America through West Africa, including Guinea-Bissau, into Europe, but there's been indications of heroin trafficking from Asia into East and West Africa, and now we're seeing methamphetamine production on the continent for transport, mostly to East and Southeast Asia. So Africa's really becoming much more embedded in the global international drug trade. So we wanted to draw some lessons from Guinea-Bissau's experience to tell us about that.
Okay. And how does this affect the neighboring countries and the region as a whole? I mean, it's such a small country. But your report seems to imply that what happens in Guinea-Bissau really does matter elsewhere. Right.
Well, what's going on in Guinea-Bissau has a direct impact on neighboring states in West Africa and North Africa. It's become really the hub for cocaine trafficking from Latin America, the hub in Africa for cocaine trafficking from Latin America through the continent and into Europe. So drugs that are normally arriving, cocaine that is arriving in Guinea-Bissau has to move to other West African countries usually to get to Europe. So that since Guinea-Bissau is becoming a worsening problem and it's drawing more of this traffic, this is obviously moving, a lot of these drugs are moving into other countries. We've seen indications where shipments that are arriving in Mali have roots in Guinea-Bissau, and we've really seen a huge destabilization in Mali recently. Drugs that have been seized in Morocco and in Senegal have links to Guinea-Bissau as well. So the degree to which Guinea-Bissau is a drug hub has direct effects elsewhere. Other insurgent groups, too, around the region have also been drawn to the fragility in Guinea-Bissau and using it as sort of an operational base and also becoming involved in drug trafficking. Guinea-Bissau has a long history of being a sort of sanctuary for the MFDC, which is a rebel group based in southern Senegal. And there has been evidence and indications that AQIM, the Al-Qaeda affiliate in North and Northwest Africa, has been active in Guinea-Bissau as well. So it really has had an accelerant effect on instability across the region.
Okay. Have you been able to find a reliable dollar figure on the size of this trade?
It's been really hard. The part of the problem is that there's not a lot of seizure activity in Guinea-Bissau, given the degree to which the crises have been accelerating and really eroding state capacity to deal with the problem. There were some really large seizures in 2006, 2007, 2008, and we've seen less than that. The UN mission in Guinea-Bissau, though, estimated that after the military coup d'etat in April 2012, the 4 months that followed that they estimated there was about a flow of 20 to 25 tons of cocaine through the country just in that 4-month period. And then they estimated even towards the end of the year that there were still hundreds of kilograms of cocaine flowing through the country every week. A kilogram of cocaine sells wholesale in Europe at about $53,000, according to the UN. So it's an enormously value-dense material. And based on arrests and investigations, the few arrests and investigations that have occurred in Guinea-Bissau, it sells for a wholesale price of about $16,000 there with some volatility. So it's a huge markup in value in moving this product into Guinea-Bissau and onwards, so that the actors in Guinea-Bissau are really generating hundreds of millions of dollars and potentially more than that.
That certainly explains the draw. You've studied a pretty well-known. You've added a lot more understanding of a well-known problem, but what are some of the solutions that you're putting forward?
Right. Well, there were, again, part of those two stories. There's one story about Guinea-Bissau, and I think what we were looking for solving Guinea-Bissau's particular problems were improving the institutional framework such that there's more checks and balances. The reason Guinea-Bissau really became a narco-state is that there was a high level of co-optation of government officials and military officials, and this had to really to do with the weakness of the governance framework there. So we propose some measures that would increase checks and balances, deter and reduce and mitigate the amount of co-optation of officials and military figures in narco-trafficking. We also propose a military reform effort because the military has really become, especially since the military coup d'etat in April 2012, sort of a node of instability in the country. And then there's this broader issue of how to reverse a narco-state like Guinea-Bissau. And we were kind of looking at what kind of tools are available for international actors to solve these sorts of new challenges that we're seeing on the continent. And I think that the classic tool that people always look at in dealing with instability on the continent is the peacekeeping operation. We always think there's conflict or something, we have to use a peacekeeping operation. People are always saying peacekeeping. But a battalion of peacekeepers is not the way you deal with shadowy criminal networks. They're not trained or have the skills to deal with those sorts of problems. And so we wanted to look at more a different kind of intervention where you had law enforcement and judicial and prosecutorial expertise, as well as other sorts of legal experts that could deal with regulatory adjustments, changes to the legal framework, such that you could increase the capacity of the state and local actors, provide sort of a mentoring influence in order to deal with the complexities of organized criminal cases, and also removing some of those gaps from the legal frameworks in a state like Guinea-Bissau to deter and prevent further problems and further trafficking.
Okay, that sounds good. Why did you choose this day? There's so many topics to look at in Africa. Why did you devote an enormous part of your time to this, and why does it matter to the Africa Center?
Right. Well, Guinea-Bissau has really been overlooked, I think, as a source of instability in West Africa. It's what's happening in this small country of just 1.6 million people is really having an impact on instability in other places like Mali or Nigeria, where people are really much more focused. So we wanted to highlight what we thought was a forgotten problem in the region. And secondly, it has to really do with this growing problem of drug trafficking on the African continent. This is an evolving trend. We were talking about 5-6 years ago when this first story emerged about cocaine trafficking through West Africa to Europe. We were thinking this is a transshipment problem. These are Latin American cartels that are exploiting weaknesses in Africa for profit in the European market. But we've seen it evolve since then, and there's a much more African criminal network involvement. There's different kinds of drugs. There's now methamphetamines being produced on the continent. It's not just being transshipped, but produced on the continent and sold in East Asia and Southeast Asia. So Africa is really becoming a much bigger part of the international drug trade, and that has huge implications for governance, for security, and for development in Africa. And so we need to get a better handle on that. And Guinea-Bissau was a good place, to try and draw some early lessons, I think, for a problem that's probably going to be around for a while in Africa.
Okay, fabulous. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks very much, Vince.